Well, welcome everyone to this webinar on whether a locally owned network is right for you. There continue to be unserved and underserved areas when it comes to broadband. The goal of communities looking at better broadband is not only to improve the quality of life and home values, thereby maintaining and expanding the local tax base, but also to spur local innovation and drive business growth opportunities. In this webinar, we'll be talking about how a community can go about assessing the benefits versus costs of better broadband and doing this upfront as they consider how to move forward to get the broadband infrastructure the community needs for their future. We're fortunate enough today to have Bruce Patterson from the city of Ammon join us to share some concrete experiences about what have worked. Bruce, did you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Michael. I appreciate the chance to talk about some of what we've done, and hopefully it's helpful to others.
Great. Looking forward to it. And thanks again for joining. I'm Michael Curri. I'm the president of Strategic Networks Group. Many of you know SNG, but for those who do not, we specialize in measuring the economic impacts of broadband, and we are applying these findings to help you understand the potential economic benefits for your community. In terms of agenda, Bruce is going to start off with looking at the Ammon Network. I'll be then talking about the economic case for investing in broadband. Bruce will then talk about some of the benefits Ammon has already experienced, and then how to go about quantifying the economic benefits. What's the process that communities or regions can look at? So to frame this out, our research has shown, we've done data collection across 9 states, worked with communities and regions and service providers. Broadband is an essential service for community infrastructure. It's infrastructure for the digital economy. So, what level of investment in broadband should be made to ensure businesses, the retention and expansion, as well as attraction, and for enhancing the local quality of life and the community's vitality. When we compare between road infrastructure and broadband, we're spending between $2 to $10 million per mile for roads, and the average these days for broadband is about $100,000. So, with that in mind, can any community afford we can say is the dirt roads of inferior broadband? And so, Ammon has gone about, developing a network to connect their anchor institutions and their households and businesses. And I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Patterson now to talk about how that network came to be.
Well, for Ammon, I think, your comparison, Mike, of the roads and the investment we make and then broadband, and that comparison is really critical because municipalities, counties, even the state have an interest in the roads. They all support that because they recognize that without them, they don't have a base for businesses to function or competition to take place. Really, they can't get services or goods distributed. So it's built into the nature of how we build any kind of infrastructure to make sure the roads are in. When a new development comes in, whether it's in a municipality or in the county, it's automatically assumed that that will happen. And so that's really an important policy decision that has to be made up front is broadband, do you feel like that's a critical or essential service? And we started with that decision. If you want to move to the next slide, we started with that decision in 2008. It was late in 2008 that the City Council in Ammon actually adopted a broadband policy, and just one sentence from that policy said that broadband telecommunications are a basic and essential service. So we identified it, said that's the case, and if that is the case, it would make sense that such services can be cared for by municipal utilities. So starting in 2008, our idea was to find a way to create a broadband utility. I don't know that we completely understood exactly what that meant at that point in time, but it started us in this process. And we applied for some BTOP monies to try and build out in 2009, again in the second round in 2010. We didn't receive any money, so we never received any grant money. But in 2011, it was decided that we would create a fiber optic utility. So we created a new fiber optic department. We established through ordinance the purpose of that department or utility. We outlined a strategy in it where we said, these are the things we're going to do. Number one was to serve the city's needs. So the first thing we said was this broadband utility, this fiber optic utility was going to serve the city's needs. Then it would do community anchor institutions, which would be maybe the county or public safety organizations or the local school districts. Then we said we would use excess capacity to support the economic vitality of our local businesses. And then finally, we said we'd serve the residents. So it's actually laid out in our ordinance in that order. So we started to install fiber. Today we have over 30 miles of backbone fiber. We serve the city. We do have public safety on the system. We do serve the local schools. We provide some backhaul for the wireless carriers. We have around 40 or 50 businesses online, and we're in the middle of our first fiber to the home district. So we're trying to follow through on that.
Real quick, this is Doug. We have Gerald Haler, I think I'm pronouncing that right, asked how big is Ammon as far as population, miles, and where Ammon might be on the economic spectrum, be it you know, well off or just middle class. Could you give us a little bit of a feel for Ammon, what type of community it is?
Absolutely. So current population is 14,500. So we're just below that 15,000 in population. We're about 3 miles across in any direction. So you're talking about 9 square miles. It's not obviously exactly a square, but that gives you an idea of what we cover. Our average city lot for a residential lot is about 1/3 acre. We do have some multi-dwelling units, so apartments and so forth. In terms of the revenue, I believe the last census showed that our average annual income per household is about $61,000.
Awesome,
so
thanks.
So
hopefully that gives you some demographics.
So thanks for that, Bruce. And for those who have questions, Doug Adams will be moderating this. And please, send any questions that you have through the chat, and Doug can then jump in. We're going to be saving some minutes at the end of this half-hour webinar to answer any questions. But back to your point, Bruce, can you share with everyone, in 2011, what was that motivating factor that prompted you or Ammon to adopt that fiber optic utility ordinance?
There was a lot to it. We took a very holistic approach, which I think is the next slide. That was one thing, but I can probably frame it in one specific experience in a way that everybody can understand. We built a new public works building. That public works building, excuse me, had had a space that we were going to locate all of the city's servers. So we do a certain amount of business functions, just like I'm sure every city does, utility billing and GIS services and all the things we do. And we needed to move the servers into that building, which meant I needed good connectivity between this new building and all of our existing buildings, and all of that was outsourced. So this brand new building, we went and got a price. We asked the 2 incumbent providers, which were the local phone company and the local cable company, for a price to connect that building using fiber, because we wanted a 100 meg private connection between those 2 buildings. And their infrastructure wouldn't support it, so that meant that it required some investment on their part to improve it. They quoted us $80,000 for a non-recurring charge and $2,500 a month to give us a 100 by 100 meg connection between those buildings. We looked at it and decided we could build it for less and that we would just operate it ourselves. So that was one piece of the decision, but it was probably the biggest building block that motivated us to say we're going to spend our own money, create our own connection, and it was really to do, first of all, those 2 buildings.
Thanks for that, Bruce.
Quick question for Monica. Are there any regulations, like I'm in neighboring Colorado right now, like SB 152, these different regulations that you have to opt out of or opt in? And are there any regulations at all regarding municipal broadband in Idaho?
Idaho law is very vague about that, but I'm going to impress upon you at this point we're really just serving ourselves. We did go into some legal process and looked at our legal risks. So Idaho law is very, very vague, and city authority is extremely limited because we are not a home rule state, And this was a brand new concept in the state of Idaho that you would set up a broadband utility. So there was a lot of legal process to be done, and what you're going to find is we followed a very narrow prescriptive path that involved a local improvement district with an opt-in function on the part of the property owners. So going to the home, it's completely optional, which means there really is not a legal mechanism to challenge, because we're only doing what the property owner is paying us to do at their request.
Thank you, Bruce. I think that's a great segue to the next slide, which is, the economic case for investing in broadband. And what does it mean taking a holistic view when investing in community infrastructure? Well, frankly, how many communities would have clean water, reliable electricity, or good roads if they applied a net present value analysis to those essential services? So similarly, for broadband, we need to take a holistic view when investing in this infrastructure. And here are some fundamental elements to an economic case for investing in broadband. First of all, municipal cost reduction financing. What are the telecommunications and internet cost reductions, now that they've built, that they forecast and have realized? The Broadband Improvement District, which Bruce just mentioned, this was an innovative new way. You have business improvement in districts, local improvement districts, and so forth. It's along those lines where the property owners opt in to this infrastructure or this program. And then finally, it's the fiscal revenues. Are sort of the key three elements of this. Because businesses are able to stay and then grow, that solidifies and expands the local tax base. There are other benefits as well. We can get into that, but these are the core, and these are what we've measured with Bruce earlier this year. And so, in terms of the municipal cost reductions, the network was planned out over 25 years, a longer-term payback, invested $1 million, and the savings are significant. They're saving almost $70,000 a year in the telecom and internet cost reductions. So pretty significant, and this actually paid for the build-out. For the subscribers, and I think this is really important, the build-out for the entire community, I mean, they're in phase one, but looking at the build-out for the entire community, it's $7.6 million. But because, there is that threshold, look, we needed, in the first phase of this, Bruce, you had a 60% threshold for people, the property owners, to opt in. They've already achieved, right off I think pretty quickly it achieved 70%. So the network was already financed by the property owners. And so the net cost for the last mile to the city was none. So there's no need for raising taxes. I mean, they've already opted in for those taxes, but nothing community-wide for those who didn't want to opt in. And there was no debt that the city had incurred. It's the property owners. Now, the property owners had to pay $3,000, but that could be amortized over 30 years. 20 years. And the net effect is, well, who's going to pay $3,000 up front? Well, the net effect was, instead of them paying $125 a month for 100 down, 3 up, 100 megabits down, 3 megabits per second up, they're actually getting 75 down, 75 up for $55. So they're saving $70 a month with that. And so that was a real incentive to folks. All this is detailed in the Ammon report, and we'll provide the links to that and where this webinar will be recorded at the end of this presentation, but all that is detailed later. In terms of the economic impacts, significant. As we said before, business retention expansion. This is an economic development program, enabling them to grow. On average, $71,000 in new revenues per business. This is all data that S&G has, developed. We've got a database of over 70,000 on how individual businesses, organizations, and households are connected and using and benefiting from the internet. And based on that, we can go into any community region and forecast, well, based on this economic infrastructure you have, these are the businesses and so forth. Here are the new revenues, cost savings, new jobs, and tax-based impacts that they can expect. So these are some pretty significant impacts. But I'll let Bruce talk to some of the specifics about the economic impacts Ammon has already realized.
So if you'd like just to advance us, there you go, Mike, thank you. So we've got a few bullet points we can talk to here. I think at the outset it's important to make the point that from a tactical perspective, some of the decisions we made might not make a bunch of sense because we did spend quite a bit of money at a very rapid pace in the first couple of years when we could have just maintained the status quo and continued to outsource a lot of the connectivity we needed. It wasn't a tactical decision, it was strategic, meaning we looked down the road and took a holistic approach, just like Michael's saying, and said, where do we want to be in 20 years? So some of the benefits we know are going to take time to develop. It's just like improving the roads. You don't see things change overnight, but if you don't have the roads, you see no progress, no improvement in the economic vitality without doing that. So a couple of things we have seen since we put the fiber in, we had a developer come in and buy a 100-acre parcel, and he's taken the first phase of the first 50 acres and he's converted into a retail center. There's a couple of big box anchor tenants, a major grocer in there, a couple of credit unions and a bank, some fast food restaurants. All of that was placed in Ammon from the simple reason that we agreed to populate that with municipal fiber, which gave those retail outlets very affordable connectivity and choices in providers for internet and phone. Excuse me. So that was one benefit. Another benefit we have seen is we've actually been approached by a business that is local to the state. They live in a surrounding community. They run a hosted business. They actually sell an Internet of Things device. It's a temperature monitor that goes into a food freezer. And if the food freezer falls out of a certain parameter, they actually get an email text that alerts them to say, you need to go do something with your freezer because they have an investment in the food in there. And it allows them to get an alert before it actually crosses the threshold where they've got to throw away a bunch of this food. So they actually operate this and they go through an Amazon cloud service. They're now relocating their business into Ammon because the price of connectivity is so little, they can now house their servers in their local business locally and pay for the bandwidth for less than what it was costing them to actually house it at Amazon. So there's an incentive for them to move in and have their business here in Ammon. So these are just two very specific examples. We expect to see an increase in businesses that allow their employees to work from home because using the Ammon utility fiber, business can create a connection from their business to the individual residential properties and allow someone to work from home and get 1 gig connectivity to the home without having to buy or purchase internet bandwidth. They can actually create their own private business network across our infrastructure. So there's a benefit we see. You saw that there's savings to our residents. An average is about $70 per month that they're saving. I can tell everyone at this point that we are introducing 2 new providers in July. We're an open access system, so we provide the road and the competition then is done by the service providers. We're introducing a couple of new providers in July. We've seen the pricing result for that, and package pricing on our system is going to be slashed in about half over the next 30 days on the part of the bulk of the providers. So what that really means is the numbers that you saw previously that they're saving $70, they're going to start to save more along the lines of $90 for a similar connection. So they'll be able to put the assessment on their property, pay the city for the maintenance and operation, which is the utility fee. Those are the 2 fees. And then they'll be able to go after they pay for those 2 and get 100 by 100 connectivity with no contract and no data cap for under $10 a month. Gigabit speeds for $50 a month. So for a small rural community, we feel like that's significant and it proves our model. So
that is significant, Bruce. Those are great stories and really compelling.
Couple quick questions. I'll leave one for the end. Ammon's not a retail provider for homes and businesses, correct? So you have several providers on the network, an open network. Is that correct, Bruce?
That is correct. We have 8 commercial providers. Today we have 2 residential providers with 2 more going into the residential space.
Okay, and Gerald, I'll save your other question for the end. Thanks.
And I think that the unique I mean, S&G were technology agnostic, vendor neutral, but I thought what was interesting is that, Bruce, you've built the infrastructure to each property, and you've also lit it. And that enables the providers then to reach new potential subscribers without having to invest in the infrastructure. They just provide the service, correct?
That's right. We're at the point today where the technology exists for us to create what we call a virtual fiber. It's tunneling or encapsulation or whatever method you want to use in a technical sense, but think of it as we can create multiple virtual fibers and make those private from what's occurring on that same fiber so that we can dedicate that resource to a particular service provider. And we can do that in software, which means I no longer manually have to have somebody assigned to do this work all day. We can actually give the tools to the homeowner and he clicks a mouse and it creates that connection to the service provider they're requesting. So it's entirely automated.
So since we're talking fiber, Bruce, is the entire network fiber, or do you have some wireless components or other technology components in it?
We're fiber all the way.
Okay. So we'll have some more questions at the end of this in a few minutes, but from S&G's analysis to sum up, the economic benefits that we've seen, the network investment has been net positive for Ammon. It has reduced municipal costs and improved public service and community anchored institution bandwidth tenfold at cost reductions. Over 25 years, Ammon's cost reduction benefits of $43.6 million outweighed the fiber network investment costs of $8.6 million for the citywide build-out. The direct economic benefits are projected to be ninefold greater at $78.2 million. And finally, and as important to the city as the financial performance of its investment, Ammon has the flexibility and the options to use its network for its own best interest because it owns the infrastructure. And I think, Bruce, that's something that you've shared with me, and I thought that was one of the key drivers for doing this. And so the question then becomes, how do other communities go about understanding what those benefits are up front to either build or debunk a case quickly? Because I think that's the key thing. Because the longer communities don't have this, the more that you have those businesses saying we can't grow, that they have to leave, that youth have to leave, and so forth. So the process, and I'll jump into that right here, is looking at what those elements to understanding the benefits are. Municipal cost reductions to the anchors, cost savings to households. Those are the hard numbers that we can quantify, and we have done that for Ammon. There's also more of a there's some hard numbers and then qualitative numbers, because I look at the benefits spectrum. So for the economic development and business retention and expansion, there's also smart city services that improve local quality of life, and there's some really interesting examples that Ammon has already implemented. And then there's also the value to the community of having that local network ownership, which enables them to say, this is what we need to do for the community, we're going to do it, and having those choices. And when you weigh those benefits against the costs, does it make sense, over what time period? And so we think this is really important, critically important for communities to have an understanding up front of whether those benefits outweigh the costs. At S&G, we want to help those communities through that process more quickly because most of the benefits are off balance sheet to a service provider's business case. You have the business case, which looks at, do the subscription revenues outweigh the infrastructure operations and maintenance? Is it profitable for business case? But the community benefits of increased productivity and revenues and good paying local jobs, quality of life, competitive internet choice, these are all things that are benefits to the community that are not on the balance sheet, and this is what we call the economic case for investing on broadband versus the service provider business case. And those community benefits far outweigh those network provider benefits, the service provider benefits. And that's why, just like we look at, having clean water, reliable electricity, good roads, we need reliable, affordable broadband, high-capacity broadband. And so I'm going to wrap up here shortly and then open up to questions, but here's some resources, so some tools, to look at the impact estimates, aggregating demand and so forth in the broadband resources. The actual Ammon report that we prepared with Bruce is up online at this URL, and this webinar will be posted on the BBA, essergroup.com/BBA webpage in a few days once we've got it up. And with that, I will turn it over to questions. Here's the contact information there.
We'll send an email out with a link to everything, so you don't have to remember that, including the presentation. I think one of the things that we're trying to keep this to 30 minutes, but one of the things that Mike neglected to say is we do have a way to quantify those, as he says, the off-balance sheet benefits based off of what other communities have experienced in terms of economic advancement. So that's part of our study as well, the broadband benefits assessment. I'm going to circle back to Gerald's question, and I don't know where Gerald is as far as, I think he's a tech guy, because he's asking specifically, was wireless mesh networking considered? Was that ever anything that you considered, Bruce, or was it just we're fiber people, we like fiber? I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good question. We did do an early analysis on wireless to fiber, and I think, you know, even the FCC, if you look at a recent report that came out of there yesterday, acknowledges wireless works best when we get it back to the wire as quick as possible. So what we kind of came to the conclusion was, to get the density that we felt like we would need to get the wireless into the neighborhoods and actually get the kind of coverage and kind of speeds we were after, you'd end up with so much fiber into those neighborhoods to support the backhaul to achieve what you were trying to achieve, that it really made more sense to put the fiber in. We also feel like wireless is great. It's a complementary thing for the access device. So that's an important distinction that we feel is critical in your decision making. And the capital churn in changing out that equipment is much, much higher than fiber. One nice thing about fiber is once it's installed and you install it at 1 gig, it's more than likely going to serve your residents and your businesses for a long period of time. We do have a little bit of wireless up because we obviously can't get fiber to every single piece of city of infrastructure, and what we find is there's a lot of maintenance and operation, and there's a lot of equipment change out. There's simply a lot of churn in that to keep up with it, whereas when we put fiber in, you set it and you don't touch it, and long term it's a better investment in our opinion.
Thanks, Bruce. So I'm going to add a comment and then wrap this up, because we wanted to keep this webinar to half an hour. What I think is really important about this model, what you've done, it is a lot of work up front to have people understand, in some cases, the value of that investment up front. The $3,000, for example, to get that property connected. And some people will just balk at that, but when they look at the longer term view and that they're paying $70 a month less for better broadband, well, then they turn around. But there's a lot of on the ground work that's needed for people to understand, this is a hardwire connection, this technology is for the future, and that they're buying into this for that longer term. So a lot of groundwork to raise awareness about what's possible, about what this means for the community and so forth, but then it's sustainable off the bat. And for us, that's important, because in that way, it's the individual property owners looking at this as infrastructure. They've invested in it for their future.
That's right, Mike. And if I can chime in just a little bit, I think part of what we're really saying here too is organizations that track fiber build-outs, infrastructure improvements, and they look at feasibility studies, particularly on the part of municipalities. There's been a tremendous amount of requests for feasibility studies, and what they find is the feasibility studies get done, but a tremendously low percentage move forward from that feasibility study. So I think part of what you're trying to point out here is a traditional feasibility study will identify some of the business aspects for you. But what we're trying to say here is there are community benefits that outweigh some of those aspects, and it takes some political will, and it takes some vision, some strategy to look down the road and ask yourself, do we want to be at the front of the pack or at the back of the pack in 20 years? Because for many communities, they simply don't have the population base to get the outside investment from the private industry. So if they want to change their situation, they've got to find some way to leverage some improvement on their own to change their situation. And this is a way for a community to do that on their own. So rather than sit back and say, somebody needs to fix this for me, it's a way that you can step forward and say, we think we can improve our own situation.
Very well said. We have, the property owners already paying for that. What you're paying to the incumbents or any other service provider, you're paying for it. Now you're buying into the network connection, but the service is separate. And so I thought that was really interesting. And in Ammon's case, the $3,000 up front, which could be paid up front or paid over 20 years, you had a take rate of 70%.
That's right. And realistically, if the homeowners will shop and they go for the cheapest package they can find on the incumbent providers, we're only competitive, Mike. We're not completely beating the bottom dollar price, and many of those providers have a baseline package that starts at around $35 a month. So what we're finding is that we've all been programmed to buy based on speeds up to. It's not the real experience, it's the speeds up to, number one, and number two, it's reliability, and it's that feeling of service that they feel like they don't have. And then when they want to make a change, it's an extremely painful process, and they probably only have one other wireline provider. Well, in the Ammon system, changing is a click of a mouse. There are 2 today. We expect to have 4 next month. And the consequence of having those 4 is the entire pricing structure now shifts downward with the competition. So the choices improve. And what happens is these providers get very inventive in ways to distinguish themselves from one another. And so they'll offer certain things. One of our providers offers the first 30 days free. Try our service, and they don't charge for the first 30 days. Others give you a public IP address as part of their service, and that doesn't mean a lot to everybody, but they don't charge any extra for it while others do. So it's a very interesting dynamic to give choice, and you see the residents able to choose that, and it's a very powerful thing. So choice is a key motivator.
So you described some benefits, and I've kept on this slide because, when a community, not just the political leaders, the councilors, the county commissioners, and so forth, understand the value, and some of them don't, but by going through this process of understanding what these benefits are, municipal cost reductions, cost savings, economic growth, by knowing that up front over the longer term, you put that investment in the true context of the community's investment in this infrastructure, or any if it's not the community investing, if it's a private sector, but they understand better what those are. And we think that is critically important to help motivate those council members and county commissioners to look at this and say, we know it's going to cost a lot, but the benefits outweigh. Let's now move to getting this network designed and engineered and even funded, so that we're not going to be left behind, as you say. So I think that's a great note to end on, unless, Bruce, there's something else that you wanted to add.
No, there is not. I just appreciate the opportunity again, Mike. Thanks for the invitation.
Bruce, thank you very much for sharing your story and joining us today. And I want to thank everyone for listening and allowing us to share the story with you. Here's our contact information, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. And with that, we'll end this webinar and wish you all good day. Bye for now.